Good afternoon, and welcome to another installment of our Cannabis Tech web series with our three amazing panelists. Today, we are joined by Justin Levy, a professor of accountancy at the University of Illinois, who will be talking finance and strategy and all things problem and solution with our team. I will turn this over to David to kick us off.
Josh, today we are looking into giving giving visibility to finance. That is not an easy task if you're in cannabis and in a finance or accounting office. You appreciate exactly what that means. Um, but it is not impossible, even if it's felt like it, even if three or four change initiatives have seemed to prove that it is. Today we're going to talk about some of the reasons it's a challenge. We've brought in some big hitters in terms of really understanding the finance from the fundamental pieces all the way up to the strategic. Um, and we're going to talk about what are some of the ways that you actually can take steps towards gaining that visibility. Of course, we have two different departments here who are in a conversation that's almost certainly talking past each other. But guys, let's kick this off. How is it that finance ends up with such a huge visibility gap? Rach, why don't you get the ball rolling?
Okay, so we see that finance frequently in cannabis is not really able to provide a lot of understanding of what's going on until after the end of a month. So month end close in cannabis tends to be kind of finance's purview and area of a lot of activity. It is generally from my experience, has generally been a fairly heavy lift to be able to close a month in cannabis. I know that they are frequently trying to meet that 10-day timeline if they can. And I've known cannabis companies that are struggling to meet a 1 month or even a quarterly close occasionally, depending on the size of the team and so on and so forth. We do see that in cannabis, finance teams tend to be smaller. Accounting teams tend to be smaller than you would see in the traditional world. For example, local golf club has 5 people and it runs a restaurant, a golf club, and a course. But cannabis teams, we will see a lot of times a large MSO with hundreds of stores and across 19 different states that has a accounting and finance team of less than 4, 3, 4 people. So all of this kind of comes together to mean that finances numbers are generally in a look back perspective more than being able to provide real-time information. And this then has knock-on consequences that we have all seen in a variety of ways.
Yeah. Tell us about knock-on consequences. Are they upstream?
It's in most cannabis operations, right? The finance team is asked to explain performance, not necessarily shape it. We see this right where the bull headline here is finance is downstream of every bad decision, right? The money's already spent, the margin's already compressed, the orders are already shipped. So by the time that the finance team, as Rachel said, gets to month end close, they're really just asking to explain what happened in a period instead of giving the ability to really shape a strategy, understand what's working and what's not.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I love that line, downstream of every bad decision. Um, and Justin, you have the most experience in terms of the finance office. Help us understand what does it really look like when the costs are not getting the attention that they deserve.
Right. Well, you're flying blind, um, in a lot of respects, and you're ignoring a really important consideration of everybody cares in a business about how much is left over at the end of the day, how much profit there is, and in a lot of cases they like substitute that by caring about the top line revenue number. And there's a lot of space between that top line revenue number and that bottom line profit. And
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of costs in there that are going to start eating away at every dollar of revenue that you get. And if you're these cannabis companies are all the product-based businesses, which tend to have lower margins than services-based businesses in general. And if you look at even established companies in the industry, they're looking at 50% gross margins. So 50% of of a dollar of revenue is being eaten up by the price you pay to buy the raw materials and produce it. And then another 35 cents or so are going to run the business. And so what do you have left over? That's 15 cents to pay taxes, pay back your creditors, and compensate owners for the use of their capital. And you want to have as much of that left over as you can, and you're not going to do it if you don't know how much the activities you're performing are costing you.
Yeah. With that in mind, like it's phenomenal, Rach and Dom, how many times we hear people focus on revenue but not really think it's that important to track their cost. It's like,
Yeah.
then why are you doing this?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then when,
Finance. Go ahead.
yeah, go
Go ahead,
ahead.
David. Oh, I was just going to say finance. What we've seen a lot of times is that we quantify business in terms of dollars. That's what we do because everybody is in business to make money. But most cannabis companies are not seeing the true dollars or the true cost of their decisions in real time. Part of the reason for this, part of what happens as a result of this, is that we have this rear view mirror of reporting that's occurring. And when that occurs, a lot of times finance ends up on the defensive because they are having to defend the numbers that they're coming up with. And the numbers that they're coming up with are numbers that are being provided to people at the end of a period. So if I spend the entire period of time, let's say I'm a general manager of a store, or let's say I'm in charge of operations, I'm in charge of manufacturing, in charge of a grow, whatever the case might be, I may have been given certain kinds of financial goals or certain goals that are tied to financial numbers. And I give my operational information that I am using, whether it's a spreadsheet or it's a specific operational software or point of sale. And I am looking at those numbers and I am thinking, man, I am going to hit these numbers. I'm doing really, really great. And then at the end of the period, I give those numbers to finance and then they do their magic, which doesn't feel like magic to me because what they do is they take all of the other things that I'm not paying attention to in my point of sale or are not actually tracked in my point of sale or are not actually tracked in my operational software, and they add them to it and they come back and they say your actual number is, and all of a sudden I didn't land where I thought I was going to land. So having these true ups occur after I am at the point where I no longer can change the trajectory of my month makes me in operations or me as a general manager of a store feel very frustrated with finance. And so then finance becomes defensive. They also become defensive because oftentimes the numbers change on them. So trying to do anything in real time and provide any kind of real time feedback to a general manager or to an operations head becomes a kind of circular challenge because operations oftentimes are not having final numbers into really trued up in real time either. They aren't truing up their inventory until the count at the end of the month, or they're not double checking these kinds of things until the end of a period. And so as a result, if finance tries to do anything in the meantime, the numbers are constantly changing. This makes finance feel very defensive about what they are going to allow to impact their world, which totally makes sense. If my numbers are always changing on me, that changes my goalpost that I'm supposed to meet. And it starts to create an additional siloing effect inside of the cannabis industry, which is something that we are constantly running into whenever we are dealing with working on the strategies for our clients.
Yeah. In one of the prep calls, we were talking about some of these ideas. Rich was saying, even it's not just finance is resistant to some of these changes, but it's actually goes further. And Justin, you were saying, well, here's part of the reason that a leadership team or those who are thinking about investors or whatnot wouldn't want to actually let the devil in the details out or be known. Help us understand that a little bit better.
Right. Well, I don't know if I would put it as pressure from shareholders, but generally speaking, performance-based metrics are going to reward short-run performance, um, not long run. So whatever you did this month, this quarter, this year is what's going to determine, you know, your financial well-being for that year. And yeah, and anything that could threaten that would be resisted. There'd be resistance to that. And I think in organizations, a lot of times there's a little bit of resistance to knowing the truth, because we can sort of be happy in our state of ignorance is bliss, so to speak. But do you really want to know that the customer that's 50% of a salesperson's business or maybe 50% of a division's operating profit, or what you think is operating profit, is actually not all that profitable because it's consuming a lot of additional resources and costs that you're not tracking.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's and it's these are really inconvenient realities that people will avoid as long as they can, not because they're bad, but because they're people.
Yeah. And Dom, you're on the front line of this where people are constantly shocked that they can't manage or navigate the volatility. So what's it like when people leave them blind?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think one of the objective realities, right, is that the market is constantly evolving, right, and so the
Hmm.
ability to respond in a certain subset of time to the change in the market. We've talked before about most retails plan on a 30-day cycle. Well, if it takes me
Hmm.
8 months to produce a harvest product that will ultimately be modified and transformed into finished goods,
Yeah.
the goalpost of my planning cycle should be as relative to that same 30-day retail cycle as possible. So often, right, we see a production run that overproduces a certain product line, mostly because the sales team was able to sell through a previous batch of it. And
Yep.
now I'm sitting on 10x the amount of units that I maybe needed to fulfill the demand in a certain geography.
Yeah.
And I ultimately will have to do some sort of discounting to that product to move through it so that I can open up capacity. And so, we started out even talking about, so much of the focus on top line, but as these markets react, your ability to respond to the compression in the market, to be able to have closer to real-time inventory, to evolve your product catalog as
Hmm.
consumer trends shift, is really core to being able to survive through the bottoming out of the market.
Yeah, and to tie this back into some of the technology things that we've been talking about in this series in general, if you are not having real-time data sharing in some form, if the information is held at a granular level inside of your point of sale or inside of your operational software, but only at a summary level inside of your financial software, and so your financial numbers, which is what you're using to quantify your business activity, is showing up only in a summary form here and not in a more granular business intelligence form, that you would want to have it, but that structure is held in the POS, or that structure is held in the operational software and not in the financial software, then what this leads to is it leads to a situation in which the ability to get the information financially at a granular level is much bigger lift than anyone can take on. And so oftentimes when we offer, and back again, when we offer an ability to connect the software in such a way that you could see these numbers on a more granular basis inside of the financial software, we get the pushback from the financial team of like, whoa, 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 but is operations going to do it right? Are they going to make mistakes that then impact my GL and I have now a bigger task at close? Or we see a situation in which, back to the whole thing around what Justin was talking about seeing the truth, I need to be able to provide a certain kind of margin that's an expected margin to my shareholders. And I don't know if finance is going to say, well, what if operations mistakes make my margins then look chaotic? And now this has a larger impact. And so there tends to be this like almost catch 22 of being able to get good business intelligence, but also being able to close your books in an efficient manner. And so the ability to connect the information, even if it's not through direct API, but at least through a reporting that could be near real time, is something that we find most companies are just unable to have for a variety of reasons.
Couple examples here just of some of those points where you have gaps that end up leading to the missed signals. And just making a great point. If you have that stuff at summary level, then you don't just have a gap or a bad decision in your process. You have like complete lack of visibility. Um, Tom, you had a great example of it's not just about finance not getting information, but sometimes it's about finance not being involved in a decision in the first place. Right there at the top of the list. Tell us about.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick on Justin's analogy here of like the what's left over in a month.
Mhm.
So under that same scenario of saying, hey, 15 cents, is left over for every dollar spent. going back to this thought of finance being downstream of a decision, you know, in a lot of cases, right, I have to use metric as my compliance system, and companies that are trying to categorize and normalize some of their inventory and their manufacturing data out of a compliance application. We saw this one example where a customer decided to get better visibility into their manufacturing, that they would add an additional step where through the pre and post harvest cycle, they would tag an additional plant. And this is a team that was doing, a large volume of harvest every 8 weeks. On its face, right, if a package tag, right, is only a 25 cents tag, but if I multiply that by the amount of times that of plants and of harvest and the hours that somebody had to now spend tagging all of those and then summarizing the data, that finance team at the end of the month that was forecasting that they were going to have 15 cents left for every dollar is now looking at that. That's trying to explain, hey, why is my 15 cents now degraded to 2 cents for every dollar? Yeah. And they weren't in the room to have the discussion around the data normalization. They weren't understanding of some other possibilities. They just were the recipients of the information post, and in Rachel's point, right, maybe it was 60 days after the fact that they finally had a signal that, hey, we created this process that we've been running for 60 days. Yeah. And let's say that those products now are getting compressed on the shelf, right? The thought of what we were going to sell that and the money we were going to make on that product has now fundamentally changed from when we originally suggested that would be a new product.
Yeah, that's intense. One of the questions came up like, at what point do you say it's the most material about tracking that cost sensitivity? And Justin, you made the point. Well, how much of your assets are in your inventory?
Right.
And, yeah.
If you're in a typical cannabis company I can speak to publicly traded. In their case, 8 to 12% of their assets are inventory, which is a lot. And it's likely to be significantly higher in smaller private organizations because their asset mix is a lot different. If inventory matters for your organization, then cost matters because there is a direct correspondence between the two. And it's going to be the case for anybody with a product. Just as a quick point to make that there's probably a bit of resistance to the things we're talking about because I believe accounting and finance information, we ask, what is it for? What is accounting and finance for? And a lot of times we're focusing on the accounting equals accountability piece. And it can also be used for learning and directing an organization and its members' attention to important things. And if you use once a measure is optimized for learning and improvement, it's going to fail when it's also tied to judgment, pay, promotion, asking what's wrong. For learning, you want, for compensation, for evaluation, you want these standardized, comparable, auditable, outcome-oriented measures that are all backward looking. But for learning, you want diagnostic measures, you want qualitative feedback, you want some tolerance for mistakes. And the instant you have somebody asking, how can I avoid looking bad? They're not going to be as focused on what can I improve. And it's a culture thing that I think we're going to segue into here in a moment.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's really interesting to me in this situation because what we find is that a lot of the reporting that accounting people are used to is based on very traditional data models. They, we talk gap accounting, talk SOX compliance, et cetera. The accounting team out of all of the teams inside of cannabis tends to use the most traditional data models that there are in terms of inside of the industry as a whole. Not using traditional data models like SKU, customer, vendor, even UPC variations is causing there to be some real struggles inside of cannabis companies for them to use some of the more standard kinds of qualitative and quantitative analyses that are out there. You can't go use a standard report that's built on standard data models if you're doing all of your planning on the lot basis or off of compliance, things like that. If you're selling things based off of a lot rather than selling things based off of a SKU and so on and so forth. So this starts to become a real problem for companies, and this starts to be a preventative to being able to give real-time access and real-time understanding inside of companies. And also a lot of the financial softwares that are out there, again, they are based, or they integrate with traditional data models. So again, if you're not running SKU, if you're not running a PEM model, if you're not running those kinds of things, if you're trying to do it based off of a compliance paradigm rather than a traditional data model, you're probably not going to be very easily, from a technology perspective, be able to get the information being held in some of the more compliance oriented systems into a more traditional financial system. And so the ability to even get close starts to really become a problem. Additionally, one other thing that we oftentimes see is that there's actual physical workflows that need to change in order to support a digital design. For example, the way that you orient your warehouse to be able to pick, pack, and ship in a traditional pick, pack, and ship system is going to be different than it is for maybe like a compliance only system. And so we have actually seen situations in which companies are saying, well, we can't possibly take on the lift of making a change because it would mean we have to reorganize our warehouse, for example. We'd have to like go in and move shelves around and so on and so forth. And that's just too big of an issue for us.
Yeah. Can I just say how much I just enjoy these conversations with you guys?
I know.
You feel like I'm sitting in a classroom sometimes as you're cooking there. I'm reminded of a Munger quote here where it is difficult to get a man to understand something that his salary depends on him not understanding.
Yeah.
And so how do you align the incentives and the performance measurements, as you said, in a qualitative fashion, I think are really, really important here. Another one of my favorite analogies is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? In a former, I know some of the things that we're talking about here could feel like this huge elephant of this undertaking of, great, all of these things that we're describing, what's left over, how do I get, a SKU to work for me when I, handling data in a certain way. But really, I'm reminded of the function of an analyst really is to find one thing that's really important. We've talked a little bit in this about some of the descriptive analytics. So again, as that finance and accounting team member, historical trends are signals, right? The ability, despite maybe not having the ability to get as real time, let's say you're starting at 60 days, being able to identify a measure or a metric or a performance indicator that changes based off of a certain set of behaviors and understanding how did this perform, and then the diagnostic element of why did it perform this way, right? So if I'm the finance team member sitting in a month in review and I'm looking at my costs have increased somehow in my manufacturing cycle, understanding the why of just being able to have cross-functional discussions, right? So getting out behind the room, having a discussion with your stakeholder. Hey, I'm seeing this trend in the data. Can you help me understand why this is happening? We don't have to go through and boil the ocean and get every single point of data connected immediately. But what are the things, I think, Justin, as we were going through this, thinking about the things that I'm really good at, how are the value add activities here closer to revenue generating? And so as I'm going through, if I want to pick one thing, well, let me identify a signal in my data that says, hey, this is the one thing that we're really, really good at. Let's go and start there from our performance measurement and understand how this is performing and the why behind it, have that open discussion so that we can't really hide behind some of these more anecdotal feedback.
I agree 100%. I think what Dom was pointing at here is the ability to view accounting and finance systems as a strategy, communication, and alignment system, where the value add is less from, I mean, you can still track things, compensate people for their performance, make sure everyone's paid on time, pay your taxes, all the other good stuff, file whatever reports you need to file. But the value add truly is coming from the learning, the cross-functional dialogue, and the shared mental models that these conversations can create when you're implementing this system. There's a lot of
Yep.
opportunity there to develop those shared mental models of what creates value, what trade-offs matter, what exactly are we trying to do as an organization?
Yep.
And these are conversations you want to have beforehand as opposed to after the fact.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
If the organization isn't on the same page, we all know that's going to struggle. But more challenge is, how do you get on the same page? Dom, that's a great one, is give ourselves a common sense of a signal. And then just in order to do that, we've also got to really be searching to communicate really well. And to the comments earlier, avoid not communicating intentionally, right?
Yeah. I think that we talked about this a little bit on our prep calls about how this entire activity, I think, Justin, you brought up that what they find happens when they start talking about things like costing models is that you start to actually bring people together and you start to have more conversations, and that breaks down silos. And we've talked a lot about the way that reporting and shared mental models and these types of thresholds that you can put in place can start to create a more common a lexicon for the business as a whole. And Dom, you and I were talking about how we recently met with one of your clients, and he was talking actually about his dad, and his dad kind of revolutionized in his local area. I think it was the propane industry by changing the way that he handled the accounting. And it actually changed the entire profitability of the business in how he changed the accounting, because all of a sudden he started having a better understanding of the logistics. He started having a better understanding of the cost of things. And it just really started to change everything altogether by moving. I believe what he did was he moved from having an independent accounting system at every single stop to having a centralized one, and then logistics being more of a web. Again, just he changed the model, it changed the communication, it changed the way people were talking, it changed what they were sharing, and it changed the business through the breaking down of those kinds of silos. And instead of having a little silo of every single outpost, they had a centralized conversation happening about the business as a whole.
Yep.
Right, Rachel, can I add something to what you just said? That I think the perhaps mistaken view of conversations like this is that you can find that perfectly accurate cost.
Yeah.
Like that, what we and that's unattainable.
Yeah.
But what this can do is force people to identify your core processes. You have a pool of resources, buildings, utilities, you have support functions. Understand how those resources are consumed by the key activities, and see the complexity of your organization more clearly. And it can answer some very important questions. But it's not so much, it's really a good enough costing model can help you get to a point where you can have these conversations and your business will be more likely to succeed.
Yeah. And when we were chatting earlier, Dom, you went through this kind of four-piece list that I thought was really great, which started at forecast. Can you walk us through that again?
You're gonna put me on a spot here to remember the four off the top of my
It was
head.
something like, listen, have a forecast, try to perform against it, but perform against it because your department, you know what I mean?
Yeah. We've probably talked on here a few times about anything that has a rate to understand
Mhm.
did my volume of a something go up? Did it go down? We don't have to overcook a forecast, right? We can take a view of historical data. We can see that for every 1,000 orders out the door, we had to Justin's point, what did we have to consume in order to get those $1,000 out the door? And so just a simplified benchmark on a 12-month average, right? Putting some cents in the line. And then it goes back to the understanding of the why. If I went above that number across my historical average, why did I exceed it? Is there a percent of that number that is tied to every single order that goes out the door? Is there a shipping cost for every single order that's going out? But as you're doing that, to Justin's point of like using it as this communication strategy, all you're really doing is getting to the truth of hey, for all of these activities we perform in order to go move the units that we do.
Yep.
Yeah, and have them all tied in. Like each of those departments should have data point that connects to those forecasts, and that data should go into your system. So if you don't have a
Yeah, I
forecast,
think,
you
I
don't.
think I got there, David, with three of them there. I don't know. I might have missed the fourth on this one. So
Yeah, well, the fourth one is, hey, if you don't have the three above, start doing the work. Start going through them.
Yeah.
And so then if we're saying, okay, well, finance, you can get help. What are great spots to start
I think
to go
the
along with the
core,
idea?
I think
Yeah.
the core thing is to start to create visibility. The visibility part needs to be there to reduce the defensiveness in between these different departments. I think that it's very easy to highlight the department that you feel as a founder or as a leader that you feel the most aligned with. We've seen clients who overemphasize production or operations, who overemphasize marketing, who overemphasize sales. It's not very often that we see a company that overemphasizes the finance department. But if you create the financial department as kind of a core central hub of being able to, like you were saying, Dom, create at least a framework for everyone else's discussion, then what can happen is finance says, hey, we're seeing a number trend. It doesn't have to be exact. To your point, Justin, you're never going to get the perfect cost. It doesn't have to be exact. It is the ability to start the conversation. Why are we seeing a trend of X this month at day 15 in the month rather than at day 15 in the next month? And then people can bring their point of view, their perspective, their piece of information. You know, it's like stone soup. Everybody comes together and all of a sudden you have something different. So marketing brings in what they're seeing. Sales brings in customer feedback. The store general manager brings in the retail feedback. Operations brings in the issues that they've been running into, and so on and so forth. And so with this structure, then all of a sudden it becomes a point of culture shift in the organization to better communication, to better understanding the business, to building a better business and being prepared for the volatility that we do see in the cannabis industry. We do see price compression. You know, we do see costs going up while prices are coming down. We see changes in tax structure that cause additional upheavals, both good and bad. And so all of these things, again, coming together is something that can happen if you will start the process. You don't have to get to the end. You don't have to be perfect. Starting the process will actually start to make this shift.
yeah, it's funny. I was reminded too that right, like finance is the language of business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the more time that your finance team is spending, reconciling a spreadsheet, cleaning up bad data, right, is time that they're not, understanding and analyzing, say, the historical trend of information. Um, you know, I really, I've always described that there's like this need for like a Rosetta Stone. So getting from the core requirements of a finance team of understanding a sort of that pulse of the business, right? It really is a muscle memory. It requires discipline, but really is the survival mechanism, right? So as things change in your market, your finance team being able to shape performance, influence your pricing mix, understand your working capital, right? So great, we want to get more orders out the door, but perhaps there's a percent of customers that we still have a balance due that we really need that capital to go run our next manufacturing cycle. So how do we prioritize the business and key activities?
Justin, you got the last word as our guest.
Oh, I appreciate that. I would say a mediocre metric that's embedded in a healthy strategic conversation will probably outperform a superior metric that nobody is using in a meaningful fashion.
Yeah.
It's
I like that.
that's I'll leave it at that and say that's my guest summation.
Man, you've
I
been
like
holding
that a
that
lot.
like the entire time, man.
I know. Nice.
Another great quote. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys and the conversation here, and I do think finance teams should speak up, both to speak the truth, but also to say, hey, we can actually get the improved pieces we need. This is not impossible. Let's do this, but it has to come from that common communication.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so
All
much for
right.
your time again today. as David just showed you, our next webinar coming up is the Team is the Tech Stack. It's basically surrounding the idea of your ERP is only as good as the humans using it, and this session will unpack how behavior, training, and accountability drive tech success, and what to do when people drift from process and kill adoption. Very fun stuff. We will be doing that on June 17th, so tune in next month for our next webinar in the series. Thank you so much, guys.